My cardiovascular risk went up 32% while I was on medication that was supposed to reduce it. 9 years on statins, regular blood tests, GP happy enough. I was doing what I was told. And then I sat down with the full 13-year data set and actually looked at the trend. My cholesterol, HDL ratio, the number that actually tells you the cardiovascular system is doing, had gone from 4.7 at the start to 6.2 at the peak. That is not moving in the right direction. That is going the wrong way on medication. I've got 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual results, the GP letters, the prescribing records, all of it documented. This is GP-supervised throughout, and I'm not making a case for or against any medication. I'm showing you my data. In the next 12 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through the full biomarker arc, what happened to my cholesterol, my LDL, my HDL, my cardiovascular risk ratio, year by year, against my medication status, so you can see exactly what the trend looks like when you put the whole picture together. We start with the 11 years because the full picture of what statins did and didn't do to my specific set of markers is the thing nobody gets to see. And without it, the 1 month improvement afterwards doesn't make any sense. Then the mechanism, why cholesterol numbers aren't the whole story, what the cardiovascular risk ratio actually measures, and what changed when the medication stopped and the food quality changed instead. And third, what I'd take into a GP conversation if I was starting this process now. This video isn't about stopping medication, it's about understanding what the data is telling you. So if you want to have that conversation with GP, you're going in with the right questions rather than the wrong ones. April 2012, first blood test on record. Total cholesterol 7.5. High, GP flags it. Understandably, that number becomes the focus for the next 11 years. And that's where things quietly went wrong. Not with the treatment, but with the measurement. Here's what Gary Taubes found when he dug into the Framingham Heart Study data. Taubes spent years pulling apart the cholesterol research. What the 1977 Framingham analysis actually showed, and this surprised me when I read it, was that total cholesterol is not a reliable predictor of cardiovascular risk in people over 50. The number had the largest impact on risk, HDL, the returns driver, not the total cargo, the ratio between them, not the headline figure. Let me explain what HDL and LDL are actually doing, because the standard explanation misses the point. LDL cholesterol is essentially a delivery driver that keeps dropping parcels at the wrong address, specifically inside your arterial walls, where they accumulate and can cause problems. HDL is the returns driver. It picks up the misdelivered parcels and takes them back to the liver where they can be processed properly. You want fewer wrong address deliveries and more returns. That's the simplified version of why the LDL-HDL ratio matters more than total cholesterol on its own. A high total with excellent return service tells a different story to a high total with almost no returns. My total cholesterol was high. That was the number being managed. But my cholesterol-HDL ratio, the balance between the deliveries and the returns, was quietly heading in the wrong direction the entire time. 4.7 in 2012, that's the target range. By the peak on dual medication, it was 6.2, a 32% deterioration in the number that, per the Framingham data, is the stronger predictor. And I didn't know to look at it because the total was the focus. Now, I want to be careful here because this isn't me saying cholesterol doesn't matter. The LDL evidence is solid. 1 million participants across 100 studies confirms that higher LDL carries higher cardiovascular risk, and saturated fat raises LDL more powerfully than almost anything in the diet. That's not contested. What is more nuanced is whether total cholesterol on its own tells you what your actual cardiovascular risk is doing. In my case, it didn't. This isn't just a condition people end up in after a diagnosis. The process starts earlier, often in people's 30s and 40s. If you're watching this without being on any medications at all, this is what the cardiovascular risk picture can look like in the years before a GP conversation ever happens. Understanding what the ratio is doing, and not just the total, matters at that stage too. Cholesterol is not actually the villain of heart disease. It's the polyfilla. When the arterial wall cracks, when the lining gets damaged by chronic inflammation, by oxidized LDL, by consistently high blood sugar over years, cholesterol arrives at the site of damage and fills the gap. It's doing repair work. The plaque is the polyfilla. You don't blame the polyfilla for the crack in the wall. You ask what caused the crack, and what causes the crack is usually inflammation and damage to the arterial lining. not the cholesterol level on your blood test. That reframe is worth sitting with, because if the crack causing mechanism is dietary and lifestyle driven and the total cholesterol numbers is being managed chemically, you might be watching the polyfilla while the cracks keep forming. In my case, and I want to be honest about what I can and can't say here, that's what the data looked like across 11 years. The total was being addressed. The ratio was telling a different story. What seemed to matter, looking at what actually changed when things improved, food quality, stopping statins, was part of the picture. But the mechanism, Sarah Berry at King's College London describes points at dietary inputs rather than just medication status. Her research shows that combining oats, barley, nuts, plants, proteins and olive oil can reduce LDL by up to 30%, essentially matching statin level reduction. Her words, not mine. You can actually reduce your cholesterol by about 30%. That's the kind of level of reduction that you'd get from a statin. Berry's not anti-statins either. She's saying the food inputs are more powerful than most people expect. That matters because my LDL dropped 32% in 14 months after stopping statins. But I'd also changed what I was eating. The medication isn't the only variable that changed. I want to be clear about that. The data is one person. Make of it what you will. The 11-year arc first, because without it, the numbers afterwards don't land properly. April 2012, total cholesterol 7.5. Fasting specimen flagged abnormal. Result, need to speak to doctor. Triglycerides 3.4, outside reference range. LDL 4.4. Cholesterol HDL ratio 4.7. That last number, 4.7, is actually in the target range. Statin started around 2016. Atorvastatin 40 milligrams, then ezetimibe added 10 milligrams, the absorption inhibitor, making it dual medication. The logic was clear enough. Cholesterol was elevated, statins indicated. GP was following standard protocol. I don't have a quarrel with the decision. I had a quarrel eventually with what happened to the numbers. December 23, on dual medication, total cholesterol 8, the highest it had ever been. 9 years into medicated management, 8. That number stopped me. I pulled out the 2012 result, 7.5, and did the arithmetic. It had gone up 6.7% while I was on medication designed to bring it down. Now I want to be careful about what I'm saying here. Statins do lower cholesterol in many people. The evidence for that is robust. What I can't tell you is why my numbers behaved the way they did. What I can tell you is what the data showed. Taking a statin without addressing the inputs that drive the underlying problem is a bit like adding coolant to an overheating engine. It will help in the short term. It prevents immediate breakdown. It buys time. But the engine is still overheating. Whatever is causing the problem, the friction, the blockage, remains. The coolant addresses the symptom. That's not nothing, but in my case, the coolant alone didn't appear to be enough. The ratio was still deteriorating. Boxing Day 2023, that was the turning point. Not medically, just personally. I'd had enough of the direction of travel. I decided to change the inputs properly. Food quality, fasting, movement, sleep. The whole picture, not just the medication. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's useful to you. 1 month later, March 24, total cholesterol 7, down from 8, better than any single reading in the entire 11 years I'd been on medication. I went to see my GP with those results. He looked at the numbers, looked at me and said something I genuinely didn't expect. Your lipids are better now than when you were medicated. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That was March 24. The improvements didn't stop there. By April 25, 14 months off statins, 16 months off changed food quality, LDL was down 32% from where it had been, from 5.6 to 3.8. HDL was up 15%. The returns driver was getting better. Cholesterol HDL ratio 4.7 to 4.8, back to where it started in 2012, after 14 months without medication. I need to say something about causation here because I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't. Multiple things changed simultaneously. I stopped statins. I significantly reduced ultra-processed food. I started fasting regularly. I moved more. I slept better. I cannot tell you which of those variables drove the improvement or in what proportion. The data shows the before and the after. It doesn't isolate the mechanism. I want to be honest about that. There was one other number that shifted that I wasn't expecting. December 23, my ALT, liver enzyme, was 69, elevated. November 25, my ALT was 10, fully normal. I hadn't targeted liver function specifically, it moved anyway. Make of that what you will. The struggle, if I'm being straight about it, the first few months were disorientating, not physically, but psychologically. 11 years of being told the medication was managing the situation, and then sitting with results that suggested it hadn't been managing it as well as assumed. That's not a comfortable place to be. I'm not saying the medication was wrong for that period. I'm saying the numbers told a story that I hadn't been shown clearly. If I was starting this from scratch, knowing what the data showed, here's what I'd have done differently and what I'd do now. The first thing is the conversation. Not a dietary overhaul, not a stopping medication, a conversation with your GP about which numbers on your cholesterol panel is actually telling the story. The cholesterol HDL ratio is already on your standard NHS lipid profile. It's there. You might not have been walked through it. Ask for it specifically. Ask what direction it's been moving over the last few years. Not just what the current reading is, but the trend. That question takes about 30 seconds and costs nothing. The second thing, food quality, before anything else. Not a complete overhaul on day one. The portfolio of food Sarah Berry's research points at, oats, barley, beans, nuts, olive oil, isn't a fasting programme or an extreme intervention. It's the direction of eating quality. You can start with one of those consistently. I'd start with the olive oil and the oats personally. Both show measurable effects in the research relatively quickly. Berry's data suggests impact within 10 days of consistent dietary change. That's a short enough window to actually test it. The longer term line expectation is honest. My ratio took 14 months to return to its 2012 baseline. Not 30 days, 14 months. The 1 month number was encouraging. The meaningful result took over a year. Anyone telling your cholesterol markers shift dramatically in a short window, I'd look at that claim carefully. The short-term signal can be real. The sustained improvement takes time. Tracking. At your next scheduled blood test, ask your GP to highlight the cholesterol HDL ratio alongside the total. If you have previous results, ask to see the ratio trend over time. Most GP practices can pull those numbers. That comparison, the trend, not just the current reading, is where your story lives. Safety, and this is the important bit. If you're on statin medication, please do not stop or change it without a GP conversation first. Statins reduce cardiovascular events in people with established cardiovascular disease. That evidence is solid, and it's not what this video is challenging. What this video is showing is my specific 13-year data set and what the ratio looked like across that period. That is one person, n equals 1 data. It's not a recommendation for what anyone else should do. If your cholesterol results have been a source of worry, and I know from the questions I get asked that they are for a lot of people, bring the ratio numbers into the conversation with your GP, not to challenge the prescription, but to understand what the trend is actually showing. If you've got questions about how to read your own NHS blood test results, what the numbers mean, how the ratio works, what I actually track, and why I've built a blood test guide that walks through the key markers I follow and how I read them, the link's in the description, and it's free. Everything in this video is educational content, not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. And this is not a recommendation to stop, change, or question your medication. If you're on statins or any other cardiovascular medication, please speak to your GP before making any changes. The full 13-year data set, the actual blood test results, the GP letters, the prescribing record, I'll link what I can in the description. Have a look, draw your own conclusions.